Hi, I'm Amy Reyes. In this week's news roundup from Rheumatology Network. This week, we featured a study published in the Journal of Rheumatology in which researchers describe a possible source of pain in fibromyalgia. They wrote that these patients can present with elevated intramuscular pressure, which could one day serve as a diagnostic aid for the condition and a target for treatment. And we featured a study published in BMJ Open that shows COX-2 inhibitors may be better than traditional NSAIDs for acute gout. The research has been published before and is yet another study that offers support for COX-2 inhibitors for acute gout. And from the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers make a case for an individualized approach for women who may need bisphosphonates. They found that in women 50 years and older, the risk of atypical femur fractures increased the longer bisphosphonates were used. You can learn more about their findings and recommendations on rheumatologynetwork.com. And from current rheumatology reports, physicians write about an unmet need in axial spondyloarthritis for optimized treatment strategies. Despite advances in the field and more treatment options, there are still many unanswered questions about optimized treatment strategies and the drug of choice for individual patients. That story is online at rheumatologynetwork.com. And finally, in today's one-on-one interview, we talk with Dr. Dimitrios Pappas of Columbia University. He and his team have recently published results from the Corrona Registry in ACR Open Rheumatology. The study shows that rheumatoid arthritis patients may be able to maintain remission or low disease activity long-term with a TNF inhibitor that is administered as monotherapy. In this interview, Dr. Pappas explains.
Yes, hi. So my name is Dimitrios Pappas. I'm a rheumatologist. I have an adjunct faculty appointment at Columbia University, New York City. And I'm also a scientific director for the Corrona Registry. As you may know, people with rheumatoid arthritis are usually being treated with one of these so-called conventional synthetic DMARDs, the traditional medications. These are pills, methotrexate, leflunomide, sulfasalazine, Plaquenil. If they don't respond to this medication, a biologic is being added usually to these traditional pills. Biologics are usually injectables or infusible medications. And they are very potent medications, right? Approximately 80% of patients, 70% of patients will reach what we call the target, which is low disease activity or remission, which means, no pain at all or very minor pain, no damage in the joints. The problem is that sometimes people may not adhere to more than one medications. The two medications together may cause additive toxicity. Patients may get tired. And the question is, how can we simplify the lives of these people? How can we increase the adherence to therapy? Would it work if we left the patients in one of the two medications, in what we call monotherapy? In this particular study, what we wanted to examine is whether people who have been treated with in combination therapy, with combination therapy, which is a biologic, Etanercept in this case, and a pill, a conventional, a traditional medication, usually it's methotrexate, and have achieved low disease activity or remission. How would these people do if we stopped the pill, if we stopped the traditional medication, if we stopped the methotrexate or whatever medication they are on concurrently with Etanercept? Are they at higher risk of losing control of the disease compared to what would happen if they continued both medications? So this was the question. Can these people get on biologic monotherapy without being at risk of faring worse?
Mm-hmm. And indeed, you found that was the case.
So the case was that people who achieved, good disease control on combination therapy, and then stopped the traditional medication, the conventional statin medication, and they stayed on biologic monotherapy, on Etanercept monotherapy in our case, they did relatively well. So that the number of patients, so the outcome that we were investigating, the way we compared people who stayed on combination therapy versus people who went on biologic monotherapy, what we used to compare this was for how long after this switch happens, disease control is maintained, for how many months. So numerically, people who went on monotherapy, who stayed only on the biologic, did a little worse, but statistically, this was similar, okay? Yes, for those people who went on biologic monotherapy, it was more frequent that they needed to reintroduce the pill, the traditional medication. In other words, as we refer to this statistically, more people were censored, okay? But the bottom line is that statistically, there were no differences. In other words, there is a subset. It seems that there is a subset of patients who can be treated with etanercept monotherapy without having a high risk of losing disease control.
Mhm. And how would you describe that group of patients, that subset that can use monotherapy?
So we couldn't differentiate that. We didn't identify, we didn't investigate factors that would increase the risk. As I said, the entire group who went to this, because these are observational data, right? This is what happened in Corrona Registry, and that's what we observed. And when we compared the outcomes, there weren't statistical differences. People did relatively the same, okay? People who stayed on combination versus people who went on monotherapy. Now, some people had to reintroduce the methotrexate or leflunomide or whatever they were for. And people who went on monotherapy more frequently had to switch to another biologic or stop the biologic. More frequent censoring, as we call it. Now, who are these people? Can we do even better? Can we identify somehow these people that have higher chances of staying on monotherapy and not losing disease control? Perhaps there are some characteristics that can be investigated in the future. Perhaps there are some biomarkers that can also be investigated in the future and can guide us a little more. So, you know, in an ideal future world, all of these patients who stop the traditional medication, or most of these patients, you know, the vast majority perhaps of these patients, will not lose control. But as I said, I mean, bottom line is that relatively, I mean, the people did the same statistically, right? There were no statistically significant differences. But given the fact that more frequent reintroduction of the concurrent medication was observed, we have to say that the result, if we want to translate it in real life, would be that there are some people for whom it's worth trying to going to monotherapy. Perhaps at the moment, not knowing more, not having investigated that more, this would be more worthwhile for people who cannot tolerate methotrexate, who are not, you know, very compliant with the therapy, and for whom the doctor thinks that if you leave them in one of the two medications, they will be more compliant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I understand there are many other studies like this, studies on TNF inhibitors and as monotherapy. And is this a trend in rheumatic disease research? Are we beginning to see how well patients across the board on all biologics do by taking these as monotherapy?
Yes, there are studies that are being published where they involve other studies. You know, the monotherapy paradigm is included in the recent guidelines. Many of the biologics have been approved as monotherapy. And in fact, I think in the last guidelines, it also says that people who have achieved good disease control, for people who have achieved good disease control, you know, cautious tapering of therapy can be attempted. It doesn't say whether, you know, the concurrent medication or the biologic should be tapered first. But anyway, there is a trend. It seems that there's a goal to identify ways to simplify therapy for patients with rheumatoid arthritis.
Mm-hmm. And what's next for your study?
For this particular study, I think one next step would be to try to identify predictors of people who are going to do best among all these people who do relatively well. Who are the people who are doing best? Who are the people who have less chances of having to reintroduce the concurrent traditional medication. We can replicate this study with other biologics in rheumatoid arthritis or in other rheumatologic diseases as well, treat with biologics. Several things can be done.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time today. Was there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
No, thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.